Flight Sergeant Dave Corpening. I'm one of the SEER specialists here on Nellis Air Force Base. I work out of the OSS. I am also part of Red Flag, so we kind of do both. September is Disaster Preparedness Month, so we're just going to talk to you about being prepared for disasters at home, out and about. If you're out, enjoying all of the beautiful nature that Southern Nevada, Southern Utah has to offer, so like mountain biking, hiking, kayaking, rafting, doing any of those sort of things. How to be prepared, whether disaster strikes, you have to stay out in the desert longer than you thought you might need to. Monsoon rolls in, whatever the case may be. So just kind of start out, we'll talk about philosophy of how not to die. So in SEER, which is survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, we teach a whole myriad of things, but the survival portion that we teach, kind of applying it to that civilian aspect, not like I'm a shot down pilot, but I'm a mountain biker who crashed and now has to walk out of the bush. So we'll think about our 5 basic needs. So those 5 basic needs start off with medical, so that's physical, and mental health. The mental health shouldn't really be an aspect. Hopefully you get rescued in, an afternoon or a day. You're not surviving for days and days and days on end. Physical health, thinking about first aid kits, things of that nature, which we'll talk about here in a second. Moving on from there, we'll talk about personal protection, which is 4 subparts. So we've got clothing, equipment, fire, and shelter. And we'll talk about finding those things, making those things, and then utilizing the equipment that you have for maximum effect. Moving on from there, we have sustenance, so food and water. Water being priority, not only because it's the desert, because it will kill you far sooner than food will. Next is going to be navigation. We'll talk about knowing where you're at, staying found, and then how to find your location and move throughout the desert. And then the last one's going to be communication. So what we teach to aircrew is using radios, using your signals to get rescue to your location. Thinking the same thing, thinking cell phone, iridium devices, things of that nature that you may want to have if you're out and about or in the home. We've all lived through the COVID pandemic. You may have lived through other natural disasters, thinking weather and things of that nature. So starting off with just in your house, we want to think about what threatens us here. Having a major ice storm in Las Vegas, probably not an issue. So we don't need to prepare as much for that. So I want to think about what is the most likely thing that is going to disrupt my life. So here in the summertime, it gets crazy hot. And if we lose power, your AC is going to go out. So thinking about how do I stay cool and stay alive in my own house if we have a power outage. So some things that could help you out is having water in the house, so significant amounts of water. You could lose water depending on the system that you're on if the power goes out as well. So what you might want to do is take some old, I like to use juice jugs. So the clear plastic, milk jugs aren't as good because the plastic degrades real fast. Take 2, 3, 4 gallons of those. If you have the space, put them in your freezer and they're going to freeze. Then what you can do if the power goes out, you can move them to your fridge, and that cold is now an ice pack. That ice pack, as it melts, hopefully the power comes back on, but if it melts all the way, you now have several gallons of fresh water to drink. Thinking about your family, it's advisable about a gallon per person per day. So if you've got a family of 5, say we want to be prepared for 3 days, quick math, that's 15 gallons of water. Probably not going to store all that in your freezer, but throw some in your garage, just keep it out of the direct sunlight, and you're good to go there. Some other things, thinking about shading your home, so having blinds, having additional shades on your windows so that if the power goes out, we can stay cool. And then potentially even if you have the money for it, battery powered fans or a full backup generation system to power fans and to keep the house kind of cooler so that you're not burning through water and just in that, a miserable state. Some other potential disasters we have here, we got one kind of rolling in, is monsoons, so that big moving water. Hopefully your home's not in a floodplain. However, you may have your road, your yard in a floodplain. So understanding that risk, do I have water potentially moving through my yard, through my driveway, through my garage? Do I need to get some sandbag material so I can pack that around my house if we have water moving? Shouldn't be long-term flooding like they get kind of in the south and the center of the country. but can I redirect some water so that it doesn't do significant damage to my home, if we do get that monsoon moving through your area? And then obviously, having that like homeowner's insurance that's going to cover flooding. Some other things, just to have around your house, if you remember the great toilet paper runs of 2020, is just having, a little bit additional supplies, for lack of a better term, so that if there is some sort of disaster, you're not having to think about, I need to go to the store and buy all these things, compete with people, potentially run into looters, things of that nature. Just like you do with a bank account, hopefully you have, an emergency fund, and typically, 3 to 6 months of expenses. So just kind of think maybe a week, maybe 2-3 weeks of additional perishables. So food, we talked about water already, toothpaste, toilet paper, paper towels, things that will run out, and it may not kill you, but it'll make your life real miserable. So you just kind of think about it. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to go buy cases of food. Just when you're at the store, okay, I go through X amount of non-perishables every week. I'm gonna buy 10% more for a few weeks and slowly build up a supply. Just put it in the back of your pantry, rotate through your stock, and you have that additional padding if you do have to, stay in your home for a long period of time due to some sort of natural disaster. All right, so if you're not at home, whether it's, commute to work and it gets disrupted by car breaks down, monsoon, you're out enjoying nature, and, you want to be prepared for any sort of disaster. So what we generally teach, like ground operation people, if you're in a convoy, we have kind of layered effects. So if our convoy gets hit and we need to get away from the area, I have, starting off, is what's on my person. So what do I have in my pockets? What do I have like clipped to my belt? Things of that nature. That's gonna be layer number one. Layer number two would be like load-bearing equipment, so body armor, chest rig, things of that nature. That's our second layer. And then the last layer would be a ruck. So even if you can't get to your backpack, and you have to get out of the area, you still have some survival gear on you. We can take the same philosophy and kind of translate it to, sports, hiking, or just having your car prepared. So what do I have on myself at all times? What do I have in like a small bag that I can grab or just leave in the vehicle? And then what's a longer thing if there is, a longer term disaster that kind of strikes. So starting off with that, just kind of talk about some different items that I carry when I'm out teaching, when I'm out doing operations, and then we'll talk about, rucksacks that can be kind of like dedicated to something has gone wrong, and I, have some items here. So starting off, like we talked about with those 5 basic needs, I want to be able to, again, identify what's probably going to kill me the quickest. What are my threats in the area? So Southern Nevada, desert environment. So we have lack of water and we have sufficient sunlight. So I want to have water, have ways to collect water and store water, and then I want to have ways to shade myself from the sun and create shelter. We're not worried about, making a shelter that's going to survive a snowstorm. We want to avoid the heat, avoid the sun. So some things that we can use for those are going to be just throwing in this little admin kit I have here. So some stuff we might want to have: space blanket, super versatile item. So this is a Mylar one with an orange shading. They also come in olive drab. That's more for evasion. I like the orange because this can also be a signal. I can use this as shade. I can also use this as a just wrapped around my body to keep myself warm. So it's good for keeping me cool and keeping me warm. Super cheap, very effective. If you don't have something like this, something else that you could have is going to be a trash bag. So like take a 3 mil 55-gallon contractor trash bag, like the nice ones you get at a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and you can throw that into a kit. They're great to just store in like a water bladder. So like thinking your water bladder cell, just slide it down in there. Or for those of you that will be potentially going outside the wire, if you're wearing body armor, just slide it up inside there. Forget about it, and it's there if you ever need it. We can then slice this up, we can carry water with it, we can protect ourselves, we can make shelter out of it, and it's a very simple, very versatile item. Some other things we may want to have is our signaling devices. So some ways to signal people, whether this is, I'm lost out in the woods, whatever the case may be. So awesome daytime signal is going to be just a signal mirror. So this one has a fireball indicator on it. It's great anytime there's sun. We can use this mirror. They can travel, 50, 60 miles if you have the right vantage point. Very simple to use. You can also just find something shiny to use as a signal mirror. Also thinking some kind of nighttime signal. Down on the bottom here I have a chem stick with some cord wrapped around it. So this one's pre-made. It's a yellow chem stick. And basically what I can do is just, I take this cord off, crack the chem stick, and then spin it around in a circle like this, and it's a very distinct signaling device, super cheap, it's very effective, and both of these take up very little room. Some other things I may want to have on my person is a cutting tool. So I got a multi-tool right here. Versatile, I can repair my gear with it, I can slice things with it that I need to. It's got a saw as well, so if I need to take larger pieces of wood, that's an option. Moving on from that wood, got potentially need to make a fire, so I like ferro rods. They're highly effective. I can dunk this in the water and it's still immediately good to make fire with. Simple striker, just use the back of my saw to actually strike to make sparks. If you're not super experienced making fire, something else that might be highly effective is just grab a Bic lighter and throw it in your pocket. Can't go wrong. It may get wet, but as long as we keep this thing dry, we got fire if we need it. Some other things we may want to take is water purification tablets. So I've got the Catadin ones, 1 per quart is typically how they go, but obviously read the instructions on yours. Very simple to just throw in there, and now I have 10 of them, 10 more quarts of purified water. So going into talking about personal protection, so we'll talk about clothing, shelters, and then just some additional equipment that we'll have. Like we've talked about, is our main threat is going to be the sun and heat, but don't think that the cold is not potentially a threat out here as well. Mount Charleston, the Sheeps, and then if you go up further north, it'll get real cold in the wintertime. So know what you're getting into. If you're going out for some of those sort of activities, obviously check the weather, and then be prepared for it to get way worse than it does. Weather's only so good. So we'll talk hot first, and then we'll go to cold. So heat, things I'm thinking about is keeping the sun off of myself. So I know we want to strip down layers when it gets hot, but if you're going to be out walking around in the desert for long periods of time, having those coverings over yourself is going to keep you cooler in the long run. So thinking about thin layered tops, long pants that are nice and thin, that are breathable, but keep the sun off of you. It's going to keep water in your body, you'll sweat less, and that sweat will kind of sit there, and then as the breeze catches it and absorb it, it'll cool you down and kind of keep a cooler layer inside of you. Obviously, sunscreen is going to be helpful as well. Pretty common sense stuff there. Some other things you could potentially use, balaclavas, gaiters, shamogs, things of that nature to keep the sun off yourself. Just throwing these in a pocket, something as simple as a buff. You throw that in a pocket and you can pull that up over top of yourself to keep yourself nice and cool if you end up being in the sun longer than you think you are. Moving on to cold, staying dry, staying insulated is going to be key. So things like Gore-Tex as that outer layer, ponchos as well, can be nice and effective. The nice thing about ponchos is they're multi-use items. I can make this into a shelter. I can cover my ruck with it. I can lay it out as a sitting pad, which is not stuff you can do with a Gore-Tex jacket. As far as extreme cold, we want to have 3 layers typically is what we preach. So an inner layer that's going to be near our body that we can change out if it gets sweat ridden, and then a second layer that is going to be that bulk of your warming, so our warming layer, that insulation, and then the last layer is going to be keeping the weather off. So if we're expecting it to be wet, we want some Gore-Tex. If it's just extra cold, maybe just another warming layer to throw on over top to really keep that heat in your body. As far as the materials go, that inner layer can be cotton. It will pull that moisture away from yourself. Outer layers, we're thinking wool or synthetic fabrics to really keep that heat inside you. And if it does get wet, it will retain its insulatory value. If you're skiing and you're wearing down, just keep in mind that if that down gets wet, the insulation pretty much goes away. So something to be aware of if you're going to spend a lot of time outdoors. do I have layers to rotate through if I start to get things wet? Always having a spare pair of socks, or take a spare pair of mittens, because they can go on your hands as mittens or they can go on your feet as socks. So multi-use item, what's cold, what do I need? Also be aware of the wind. Up north in like central Nevada, it can get super windy, and that wind combined with just a little bit of cold will suck any heat out of your body. So having like wind-breaking layers like Gore-Tex, any other waterproof material is going to cut that wind a lot better than like a puffy jacket might.